Law at Work is sponsored by Perrett van Niekerk Woodhouse Macholo, leading labour law specialists representing businesses throughout South and Southern Africa, as well as Case Law, the quick, fast and easy labour law search engine.
Hello, I'm Simon Colman and welcome to The Law at Work. Temporary employment is widely used in South Africa by many employers. There are fears, however, that a lack of regulation is leading to the abuse of workers. Joining me in the studio to discuss the issue is John Botha, the COO of the Confederation of Associations in the Private Employment Sector. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Simon.
John, before we get into the nitty-gritty as such, could you just talk a little bit about the nature of temporary employment? What is it?
Simon, temporary employment services are an international phenomena. It's where a company would make a strategic decision to focus on its core business. You're probably aware that managers spend close on 40% of their time looking after human resources matters. Right. So what it really does is it frees up the client's management to focus on growing their business. Okay. So it's a strategic initiative. By the same token, Simon, what it also does is it provides a very flexible cost structure for organizations. Human resources being a very big cost item on the expense budget, then allows companies to match their cost with their revenue streams. So it's a very competitive strategic decision.
Okay, how widely is this used in South Africa?
It's a very widely used business opportunity and a business strategy. In South Africa, we have more than 3,000 temporary employment services, placing, just within the services sector, placing more than 400,000 temporary workers on any particular day. And Simon, we believe that if you look at the other industries and the other sectors, you could probably double that. So we're looking at close on 4% of the economically active population being placed through this industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. Why is there this concern? You heard when I made my opening remarks there are some fears that perhaps workers are being abused. Is there any truth to that? What is the concern?
Simon, I think every industry has fly-by-night operators, and I don't think we're any different to that. We have fly-by-night operators. And
the Bucky Brigade, I
think. The Bucky Brigade, yes.
Yes.
And you know, we certainly don't tolerate that kind of conduct. The industry's self-regulated itself for more than 3 decades.
Right.
And we currently at NEDLAC, we're busy negotiating what we call co-regulation. We're working very, very closely with COSATU, with FEDUSA and the other trade unions, NACTU,
yes,
and also with government. And we're very positive that within the next 12 to 18 months, we'll have a co-regulatory statutory right to regulate.
John, I think sort of post 1996, just after the new regulations and new legislation came out, there seemed to be a perception by some employers perhaps that they could avoid some of their responsibilities under the law by using temporary employment services. Is that a practice that still goes on today?
Simon, I think that as I said at the outset, I think it's primarily a strategic decision that companies make to outsource. Labour law places the full obligation for compliance with labour law primarily on the temporary employment service. Right. So temporary employment services fulfill a very sophisticated role. They've got to comply pretty much with all the labour laws.
Yes.
And there are also instances where if the temporary employment service doesn't comply, it places the client in a position of liability, joint and several liability. So we believe the regulatory framework is adequate. What we're really pushing for is regulation of the industry with our social partners.
Let's talk about those regulations. COSATU had some criticism of the industry a little earlier in the year. And there was some talk of a 3-month restriction in terms of somebody becoming permanent after that time. Can you comment on that?
Simon, yes. The 3-month restriction on temporary employment, first of all, is no longer the issue. At NEDLAC, we've moved significantly away from that. We've been engaging with trade unions around that. The comment that I have around that particular issue is twofold. First of all, we see in South Africa, we have the 2010 project, we have the Gautrain project, and quite frankly, a 3-month limitation on temporariness is not going to meet the real business needs in respect of that.
Absolutely.
I think anyone can see that. What we need to do with our social partners and say, what is it that's worrying you about this particular fixed-term contract? If a temporary worker is going to work for a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years, if they're concerned about the fact that that worker doesn't qualify for many benefits post that particular assignment, well, then we need to talk about that. If they're concerned about benefits during the assignment or any other issues, we need to discuss that. But the 3-month threshold is not going to be of use to anyone, quite frankly. I believe it will undermine employment growth simply because companies use the flexible, labour-intensive methods because that option's there.
Absolutely.
I think the misperception comes when some stakeholders believe that if temporary employment services were curtailed, that it will then translate those 400-odd thousand jobs
into
permanent positions, and that's not the case, Simon.
On that, you think that those employers would simply say, well, then we're not going to engage in any of those activities rather than convert them all into permanent staff?
Absolutely. I think those employers would look for other methodologies and other initiatives in order to drive their particular value proposition in their business. I certainly don't think it's going to result in permanent positions. The other thing, Simon, is that our industry acts as a catalyst and a channel for what we call outsiders to get into the labour market. You know, new graduates that are unemployed, aged people with a skills shortage wanting to come into the labour market. We act as a catalyst and a facilitator to introduce those people into the formal labour market.
Right.
And more than half of those 400,000 temporary workers are in fact outsiders. And if this industry were curtailed to any extent, then I think we'd have significant prejudice to
they would
job
be excluded
creation.
from the economy.
They'd be excluded
basically
from the economy, and we'd undermine GISA and GIPSA and a whole lot of other wonderful initiatives.
Absolutely. At bargaining council level, obviously there are a lot of bargaining councils in South Africa. There also seem to have been some moves to regulate the temporary employment industry. What do you have to say about that?
Simon, we encourage regulation of temporary employment services.
Yes.
Bargaining councils and the primacy of collective bargaining in South Africa means that unions and employers can negotiate at that level.
Yes.
We just need to contextualize it, though. We haven't faced any significant curtailment of the industry in any other bargaining council other than, so to speak, the road freight industry, and even that we're busy engaging in the stakeholders.
Was there an attempt in that industry to specifically exclude temporary employment?
Yes, Simon. What happened there was that they made a decision to place a threshold on the number of temporary workers that companies could outsource.
A quota of sorts.
A quota of sorts.
Okay.
And we're currently taking senior council advice on that matter because there are a number of unintended consequences of that kind of engagement, and we as an industry were unfortunately not engaged in that process. So we're taking an approach to try and educate stakeholders about the significant contributions that this industry does make.
And how is that going? I mean, are you making any inroads there?
Absolutely. Our industry's formed unbelievably strong alliances with Business Unity South Africa. We're members of BUSA. The unions have been unbelievably open-minded about this. And at NEDLAC, I believe we're moving forward. We meet with the Minister of Labour regularly. He certainly has lent us his ear, so to speak. And I think we need to look for a balanced solution, and I believe we'll get that solution.
Excellent. John, thank you very much for joining me in the studio.
Thank you.
To you at home, we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Law at Work is sponsored by Perrett van Niekerk Woodhouse Macholo, leading labour law specialists representing businesses throughout South and Southern Africa, as well as Case Law, the quick, fast and easy labour law search engine.